Subcommittee will now come back to order. I'd like to call our third panel of witnesses for this hearing. Ms. Irene Dorner, the President and Chief Executive Officer of HSBC Bank USA and HSBC North America Holdings in New York, and Stuart Levy, the Chief Legal Officer of HSBC Holdings in London. We welcome you both. We appreciate both of you being with us this morning. We look forward to your testimony, and we also want to tell you that we appreciate the cooperation of your bank. It has been consistently cooperative with us, and we are grateful for that. Pursuant to Rule 6, all witnesses who testify before the subcommittee are required to be sworn, so I would ask you both to please stand, raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? The timing system that we have will give you a red light after 5 minutes, but a minute before that it'll shift from green to yellow to give you an opportunity to conclude your remarks. Your entire written testimony will be printed in the record, and we would again appreciate that you attempt to limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes each. Ms. Dorner, we will have you go first, followed by Mr. Levy, and then we will proceed to questions. But first, let me turn to Dr. Coburn.
Thank you. I privately greeted our witnesses, and this afternoon I'll be in and out, but I will be here to ask my share of the questions. So if you're in the midst of your testimony and I leave, please forgive me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coburn. Ms. Dorner.
Thank you, Chairman Levin and Senator Coburn. My name is Irene Dorner, and I serve as President and CEO of HSBC Bank USA and HSBC North America Holdings, Inc. I have led the bank in the U.S. since January 2010. I fully appreciate why we are here and believe that a discussion about controls at global banks is an important one to have. We deeply regret and apologize for the fact that HSBC did not live up to our own expectations, the expectations of our regulators, our customers, our employees, and the general public. HSBC's compliance history, as examined today, is unacceptable. HSBC has learned some very hard lessons from the experience of the past few years, but we have taken very substantial steps to address the problems that we, our regulators, and this subcommittee have identified. We have made fundamental changes in governance, culture, training, and funding to ensure that we can effectively deter illicit use of our bank in a manner that will be embedded and sustained going forward. The process is ongoing and requires vigilance. As you know, these issues and challenges do not end at the water's edge, so we are combining our efforts with reforms that apply throughout HSBC's global businesses. And I'm joined today by our new Chief Legal Officer, Stuart Levy, who is here on behalf of the HSBC Group and who will describe HSBC's global compliance commitment. Given my experience working for HSBC in other parts of the world, I am cognizant of the risks and obligations that come with serving our customers who have a need for global banking services. And at an absolute minimum, we must have the proper controls and systems in place to ensure that we are doing the right business in the right places with the right customers, and that our customers' transactions are properly monitored. If for any reason a transaction appears to be unlawful or suspicious, then we scrutinize the customer and report this information to the authorities in a timely manner. As the subcommittee has documented, we have fallen short in a number of serious ways. In October 2010, the US Bank entered into a consent order with the OCC. With the full support of our board and of the HSBC Group, I took the lead in overseeing our remediation efforts, and we have taken significant steps. First, we've worked hard to foster a new culture that values and rewards effective compliance, and that starts at the top. By the end of 2010, we had a new US senior management team in place. We overhauled our AML compliance function, improving the quality, coverage, and strength of our AML program through additional staffing and training. We've increased spending in AML compliance 9-fold from 2009 to 2011, and today we have 892 full-time AML compliance professionals. Second, we have undertaken an enterprise-wide risk assessment and have exited customer relationships and businesses that do not represent acceptable manageable risks. This is an ongoing process, and we continue to do a formal risk assessment twice a year. Third, we have made changes to our Know Your Customer policies because proper KYC must be robust to be effective. We must know a significant amount about our customers to be satisfied that we want their business. Our new KYC policy delivers a critical look at each customer, including our own HSBC affiliates. We have also implemented a new customer risk rating methodology, which takes a holistic view of customer risk. I chair the project to apply our new KYC standards to our entire customer base. Many of the changes we are making are being adopted as HSBC global best practices. And finally, we have made significant investments in technology, and we have built better controls around our automated monitoring system, although we recognize that there is more to be done. The intended consequence of these changes is to embed a new culture of responsibility, accountability and deterrence within our US bank. It has been my mission and the mission of my new senior team to make sure that compliance is on every employee's mind at every level in the organization. In closing, let me say that I do appreciate this subcommittee's efforts to examine and improve the steps taken by industry and government to address these challenges and the recommendations you have made. We are committed to fulfilling our responsibilities in an effective and sustained manner. Thank you, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dorner. Now, Mr. Levy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Coburn, my name is Stuart Levy. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of HSBC, a position I've held for the past 6 months. I'm pleased to be here at the subcommittee's request to participate in today's hearing, and I'd also like to express the appreciation to the subcommittee staff for its hard work and professionalism. Some of the information discussed earlier today and in the subcommittee's report is sobering, highlights serious historical problems at HSBC. And we haven't shied away from that. In fact, we've gone to great lengths to cooperate, not only to be helpful to you, but to help us diagnose the problems and identify solutions. We obviously have a great deal of work to do. I know from experience that it's critically important to our safety and security to stop illicit actors from gaining access to the financial system. At HSBC, we must do everything in our power to prevent that access through our bank, and we embrace that responsibility. That's why we're taking action not only to address the specific deficiencies the subcommittee identified, but also to implement a global strategy to tackle their root causes. This is a complex undertaking given the scale of our institution and our multinational footprint. But if we get this right, it will make a difference. At the beginning of 2011, there was a transition at HSBC to a new CEO, Stuart Gulliver, and our new chairman, Douglas Flint. Our new leadership team understands these challenges, and they approached me to join them to help drive the necessary changes. My views on these issues were public and well known, and HSBC's leadership wanted me to bring my experience and commitment to bear on their challenges. I'd like to outline for you the path that we're on. First, beginning in January of 2011, we have reorganized HSBC around 4 global businesses and 10 global functions. This means, for the first time, that the global head of a function, like myself, has authority over the operations and personnel of that function wherever we operate. This makes it easier to manage our risk globally. The historical, decentralized corporate structure that concentrated authority on country heads has been replaced. Second, we have simplified our business model to make HSBC easier to manage. We are reducing our footprint and product lines. We have focused on selling and exiting non-core businesses, such as our global banknotes business. Over the past 18 months, we have sold or exited 31 businesses and are already withdrawing from 9 countries. Third, we have elevated and strengthened the role of group compliance, so it is now empowered to set standards across the organization and has the necessary authority to ensure that those standards are enforced. Our new Chief Risk Officer, Mark Moses, is also providing fresh leadership in this area. Fourth, On April 30th of this year, our CEO issued a directive to the entire bank requiring adoption of high uniform standards across the firm. We are adopting a highest common denominator approach, applying everywhere the highest standard that we must apply anywhere. That will most often mean that we will be applying U.S. standards globally. This means that instead of the U.S. taking on risk from abroad, as you discussed in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman, instead, high U.S. standards will be exported globally, thereby promoting the integrity of the financial system. Among other things, that directive, or group circular letter, also requires that we maximize information sharing for risk management purposes and that we apply a globally consistent approach to knowing and retaining our customers. The CEO has also directed the Chief Risk Officer and me to co-chair a steering committee, on which Ms. Dorner also sits, to drive implementation of this new approach. We have already begun our work. For example, we adopted a new global sanctions policy. We ordered global application of the obligation to conduct affiliate due diligence. And we adopted a new risk filter to reduce and better control the business we do in any high-risk country where we operate. This is the process under which we decided to close the Mexican Cayman accounts that were discussed this morning. This is the beginning of the journey, and we have a long way to go. And we agree with you, as you say in your report, that the burden of proof is on HSBC to demonstrate progress on these reforms. In addition, in 2011, our CEO introduced a new values program under which all senior executives are evaluated on whether they adhere to the bank's core values, including respect for compliance. In the end, sustainability of these reforms depends critically on the commitment of HSBC's top leadership. I have confidence because I know our board and senior leadership are committed to seeing these reforms through. We understand that this is something that absolutely must be done for the long-term success of the bank. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levy. And let me start. We'll have, I think, a 10 round. Is that? We'll have a 10-minute round.
You may go at 20 minutes.
Okay. In 2003, HBUS was the subject of a formal enforcement order by its regulators at the time, the Federal Reserve of New York and the New York State Banking Department, and it required the bank to revise and revamp its anti-money laundering program due to some very serious deficiencies. HBUS made a commitment at that time to correct the problems. And after 3 years, in 2006, the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, lifted the enforcement action despite a host of unresolved issues. 4 years later, in 2010, the bank was right back in the soup, the subject of another enforcement action by its regulator, this time the OCC, requiring the bank to revamp its anti-money laundering program due to severe deficiencies, and many of those were similar to the problems that had been identified in 2003, including many violations of federal anti-money laundering law, a backlog of over 17,000 unreviewed alerts regarding possible suspicious activity, failure to conduct any anti-money laundering monitoring of $60 trillion annually in wire transfer activity by customers domiciled in countries rated by HBUS as lower risk, and failure to conduct any due diligence of HSBC affiliates. Now, on April 30th of this year, the HSBC Group, as you've testified, issued a new group-wide policy that applies to all of its affiliates around the world, and that's Exhibit 2B. Now, this group circular letter requires all HSBC affiliates to meet the most stringent standards anywhere in the group. And it states that the bank and its affiliates will adopt and enforce the adherence to a single standard globally that is determined by the highest standard that we must apply anywhere. Often this will mean adhering globally to U.S. regulatory standards, but to the extent another jurisdiction requires higher standards, then that jurisdiction's requirements must shape our global standard, close quote. That new policy statement could be a groundbreaking commitment. that will force the entire HSBC network to improve, and I hope it does. I understand, Mr. Levy, that you're co-chairing a committee. You just testified about that, aimed at implementing the new group circular letter. But here's what HSBC said in 1993. Group members should comply with both the letter and spirit of all relevant laws, codes, rules, regulations, and standards of good market practice in each jurisdiction around the world where they conduct business. The 2012 GCL and the 1993 compliance policy statement have good sentiments, and they sound very similar in a lot of regards. They promise the bank will adhere to high standards, and as I've said before, commitments and promises are welcome. But accountability for previous failures and conduct that has already taken place is essential as a deterrent, and it's that accountability that's been missing. My first question is the following, and either one of you can answer. Let me try you first, Ms. Dorner. Do you agree that given past commitments that have not been kept, that the bank has a heavy burden of proof that they mean what they say, or you mean what you say, both as to changing behavior and as to changing the culture?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can entirely understand these concerns. It is quite clear that we have had failures in the past, which we deeply regret, and I would agree that we have some way to go to regain the trust of our regulators and of yourselves on this subcommittee.
Now, thank you. Exhibit 71D is a chart which was prepared by an outside auditor at HBUS's request that lists accounts that are held by HSBC affiliates in the United Kingdom and Hong Kong for banks in rogue regimes subject to U.S. sanctions, such as Iran, Iraq, North Korea, and Sudan. A total of 55 suspect banks with U.S. dollar accounts made possible by the HSBC affiliates' correspondent accounts at HBUS. Now, my question is basically, how could HSBC affiliates accept such clients? And do you know whether HSBC told HBUS that it was servicing these type of clients?
Mr. Chairman, clearly this predates my tenure of being in the United States, and so I can't comment specifically on this. I can tell you now that HBUS does not hold accounts for any of these names.
Thank you. One of the accounts that was in an HSBC affiliate is a U.S. dollar account for an Afghan bank on the SDN list from October 1999 through February 2002. It was on the SDN list because of its ties to the Taliban. It's incredible to me that an affiliate of HSBC, an affiliate which is located in the UK, could even consider opening an account for a Taliban-affiliated organization and continue the relationship after the 9/11 attack. Now, there's another extraordinary example here as well, and that's Exhibit 50D. That's an exchange of emails in 2008 between HSBC employees in the U.S. and the Cayman Islands. An anti-money laundering compliance officer at HBUS received an inquiry from OFAC regarding a trust account in the HSBC Cayman affiliate, which was administered by HSBC Geneva, and which had been established to benefit a well-known international terrorist named Rami Makhlouf. He's from Syria. The exchange is stunning, if you'll take a look at this one. The Internal Control Officer for Compliance in the Cayman Islands admits that the trust for Makhlouf exists and the Cayman affiliate is the trustee. In a subsequent email, she informs HBUS anti-money laundering officer that a year earlier, 2007, concerns about this client were raised and the relationship was viewed at group level, which decided to maintain it. In other words, people at HSBC headquarters made a conscious, knowing decision to maintain an account for the benefit of an international terrorist. So, how is it that HSBC Geneva, or its Cayman affiliate, or any affiliate in the HSBC system, could have maintained a trust benefiting a terrorist or gotten permission from group headquarters to service such an individual? And if you wish to comment as well on that account that was being held for a Taliban-affiliated organization, you could do so at the same time. So, Ms. Dorner.
Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid I'm not able to assist you on the account for Mr. McCloof because he is not a customer of HBUS, and I am not acquainted with this chain of events.
Could you become acquainted and then give us your comment for the record?
I can look at the chain of emails, yes.
Will you do that?
I can do that.
Okay. Mr. Levy, do you have a comment?
Naturally, this is long before my tenure. I do know who this individual is. He's someone that we designated when I was in the government. He was designated in 2008, I'm pretty sure, under a sanctions program by the United States. I don't think this is the kind of thing that we need to change. I think I'm sorry if I misspoke. I do think this is the kind of thing that we need to change.
You made reference to your service with the U.S. government. You were if I remember, the Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. Do I have it right?
Yes, sir.
How would you have reacted if you knew that HSBC was engaged in such a practice and that an HSBC affiliate knew of the HSBC account and didn't report it?
I think that would be unacceptable.
Wouldn't it be even stunningly unacceptable? I mean, you know, unacceptable is kind of a lot of things are unacceptable, but on degrees of unacceptability, isn't this kind of shocking?
I'm not going to quarrel with you, Senator, of course. This is not the kind of thing. This is exactly the kind of thing, I should say, that we're trying to change, where we're trying to make important compliance information mandatorily shared to compliance officers around the world. This would be the kind of thing that would, in my view, fall into that category.
Dr. Coburn.
Thank you. Ms. Dorner, as I understand from the report, you arrived to run the U.S. affiliate or the U.S. organization in 2010, and were handed a pretty good-sized mess. But why, irrespective of these challenges, does SBC choose to have a presence in the United States in the first place? I mean, what's the value to HSBC? You're in all these countries, you're worldwide. What's the value? Why are you here?
Senator, that's a great question. This is a terrific place to do business. There are more than 10,000 U.S. headquarters of international companies based here in the United States. We, as an international bank, it is our business to help our customers realize their aspirations. And so we have many, many United States companies who want to grow internationally. And they use us, and we help them to do that. We connect them with international business. And then there is incoming business, and of course, as you know, we do have businesses in other parts of the world, and I'm thinking particularly here of Asia and emerging markets, where many companies wish to do business and wish to invest in the United States. And it is the role of HSBC as an international bank to facilitate that. The United States is the biggest trading nation in the world. It's a massive opportunity.
So, given the mess you've had and what you've seen, the consequences, both financial and from a business standpoint, as a result of the consent order with OCC, would you outline what the impact's been on your organization? The latest consent order.
The latest consent order has had a massive impact. Clearly it happened just after I arrived, and I can tell you that what we have done is that we have changed the senior management here in the United States. We've changed our general counsel. We have changed our head of compliance. We've changed our AML director. We have had a top-to-bottom overhaul of the way that we actually do AML compliance. We're burning the bridges to make sure nobody can get back to the way it was before. We've got new governance in place. We've got new structures. We've got new policies. But actually, you know, the processes and the policies are never enough. This is actually about the people. And so it's my job to make sure that right the way down the whole organization, the DNA of HBUS, we actually get compliance on the front foot in everybody's mind. And in terms of, you know, fixing it, that's what CEOs do. I am clearly absolutely committed to fixing this, but the reality is the change that will take place and is taking place is that this has to be fixed for the future. This has got to be BAU. So business as usual is not just about fixing the consent order. It's driving this through into the future as a full-scale remediation that will last.
So you put all these steps forward and all these changes. But the real thing that you have to change is the culture. So,
that's correct, Senator.
So how are you doing that? I mean, you've outlined the steps, but where's the leadership that's going to change the culture? Where's the examples so far since you've been there changing the culture when somebody's violated some of these policies? What has been the consequence? Because the only way you change a culture is if everybody in the organization sees when you violate the core values of the institution that there's a consequence.
Senator, I can tell you unequivocally, since I have been here, that I have fired people for not complying, that I have clawed back in terms of future remuneration, and I have reduced compensation. Of course, that's the negative side of things. Equally, we have celebrated success. We have examples of compliance officers who have been put onto our intranet to show people that this is where it's at, that they should be looking at these kind of standards to drive the way that we do business. It's quite clear that we need to make further changes. There's never enough done. We can always improve, but this has got to be on everybody's lips from top to bottom of the organization. And I would just say that one of the big changes that has helped me in this is that this group has changed in terms of how it wishes compliance to be viewed, and compliance now has a control function role within the whole group. And so I am totally supported by the HSBC group in this and by the HSBC group senior management.
Okay, I just have one more question for you. You mentioned that the changes you made to know your customer policies have enabled you to make better decisions about whether a customer fits your risk appetite. Would you describe what your risk appetite is at HSBC or HBUS?
I can do that. I think that the thing about risk is it has to be taken at the highest level. You're trying to find the right customer, and so it is about understanding customers' business, where they do business, why they do business, and what they want to do with us. And therefore, when you put a KYC process in place, those are the things that you are looking for throughout. And not only are we looking for that in our future customers, we are actually remediating the existing customer base we have to make sure that the customers that we already have fit within the risk appetite that we have. And I can tell you now that we have exited, as a result of rolling out this remediation, in the order of 14,000 customers because they simply did not fit our risk appetite.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Levy. This is a 300,000-person organization. You have an impressive resume, but you're just one of you. And you've entered into an organization that has a admittedly poor record and presumably a poor culture for compliance to match that poor record. When you leave here today and resume business as usual and go back, what's going to be the impact of a hearing like this or a meeting with the government like this in terms of how it affects the bank operations, the structure, and the culture?
Well, Senator, I can assure you that the top leadership of this company is very focused on your report, on this hearing, on all the information that has been developed in the course of this investigation. In fact, it wasn't just when the report was issued or we were coming to testify today that there was engagement from the top. As I said, the change began when the new CEO took office at the beginning of 2011, and they reached out to me soon thereafter to ask if I'd come and help drive the change that they were pursuing. I believe that the culture and the tone at the top is excellent. We have, risk management meetings where the top executives of the firm sit around the table and we share the information in ways that apparently didn't happen as robustly before and make the kinds of decisions that are necessary for controlling these sorts of risks. I believe that this whole experience is one in which, as our CEO has said, we're going to be judged by how we respond to this sort of adversity, and he's absolutely committed to getting this right, not in large part because we think it is critical to our success. If we're going to be a successful, the leading international bank, which is our aspiration, we have to be successful at this. We have to lead in this area as well.
Is there a conflict within your board I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. Compliance here doesn't necessarily have to be difficult, but it has to be right. And there are some variables that affect that. How well do the regulators do? Are they fair? But are they trying to do the right thing, not just be right? Is there a conflict or tension between the potential, as Ms. Dorner outlined, of being a global bank with a large number of multinational countries here and the cost of compliance? And because I actually see that's where things really went awry, and how do you manage that tension so that when they're looking, if this is a great business opportunity for HSBC, is this too much of a compliance hurdle or cost given the potential capital appreciation opportunities for your organization?
Senator, I don't believe we view this as a tension or a tough call. We're going to have to get this right, whatever it takes to get this compliance in order. I don't think there's any ambivalence about that on our board, and we view it as our responsibility, quite aside from the regulators, candidly. It's our responsibility to get this right, and we appreciate the help we've had from the committee and the recommendations, but it's our responsibility to look at those and improve, and also identify the improvements ourselves that we need to make.
With the changes that Ms. Dorner has put in and with your expertise, is it your opinion that will you be better in terms of compliance, but you'll be a better organization and a more profitable organization as a result of it?
I agree with that entirely, Senator. I think that there is no real conflict in the long run between those two things. Being compliant, having the right controls in place is in our long-term financial interest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For a moment to that situation with the Syrian terrorist. There was an inquiry from OFAC. We want to start with that. It was an inquiry regarding a trust account in the HSBC Cayman affiliate that was administered by HSBC Geneva. What happened then is that an anti-money laundering officer at HBUS, and this again is 50D, anti-money laundering officer at HBUS wrote the following, that we've determined that accounts held in HSBC Cayman are not in the jurisdiction of and are not housed on any systems in the United States. Therefore, we will not be reporting this match to OFAC. So, HBUS knew the account existed, knew that there had been a request about this account from OFAC, knew that an HSBC affiliate maintained it, but was not going to get that information to OFAC based on this jurisdictional line. In effect, what the anti-money laundering official decided to do was to use the affiliate's separate entity status as a reason to not report a Syrian terrorist's HSBC account to OFAC. So, we got HSBC crossing international lines to establish and service the trust, to protect its assets, and to facilitate McLuth's transactions. And this is 2008, by the way. And yet, they rely on that technicality not to report the information to OFAC. And so my question to you folks is, if this same thing happened today, would you get that information to OFAC?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar. Obviously, this is, again, several years before I arrived. I don't know the details of what happened here. What I can tell you is that one thing we have done that would handle this kind of situation is that we have now adopted a global sanctions policy so that anyone who is designated by OFAC will search across the entire bank in all jurisdictions and all currencies to ensure that we catch all those situations and either freeze accounts if we're permitted to, because if it's a U.S.-only designation, we may not be able to freeze the account, or exit or reject transactions. I'm not in a position to go into the details of
I think you've answered the question. I think you've answered the question without going into the details. You're saying that, first of all, every affiliate is going to apply the same catch mechanism. That's number one. So presumably they would have caught this.
Yes. What I don't know, sitting here...
If it would have been caught by HBUS, it would have been caught by Cayman.
Right.
Right? Okay. Presumably.
Presumably, yes.
Should be.
What I don't know is when Rami Makhlouf was actually designated. I don't have the date in my head.
Putting aside that, the question is, presumably it will be caught by the same mechanism being applied in every one of your banks, wherever they're located. My question, though, is if for some reason it fails, and if one bank knows that information is being sought by OFAC, will it make sure that that information is provided? That's my question.
My view on this would be that we would give to any government as much information as we're legally permitted to do when we get a valid request. So I can't tell you whether there would be some legal restriction, but we would do everything we could to get them the information.
Well, when you say what you're legally permitted to do, were you legally permitted by the Caymans, by their law, to provide this? Do you know Cayman law won't allow this? They're a secrecy jurisdiction.
I don't know, Senator.
Well, but you need to find out.
Pardon me? Will I find out?
Are you going to be bound by a secrecy jurisdiction's law that says you can't share that information? Or are you going to be carrying out your commitment here that you're going to treat all of your affiliates as though they're in one place globally, and you're going to respond to law enforcement with their request? I mean, if you're going to say, if legally permitted by the Caymans or by any other country, you've got tax havens and so forth with secrecy jurisdictions, Caymans being one of them. Are you bound by that? Are you going to work with law enforcement, or are you going to be bound by Caymans?
We're going to do everything we can to cooperate with law enforcement.
Well, you say, though, that if it's legally permitted, that's your hedge word. U.S. law binds you to report to OFAC. What are you going to do? Live up to Cayman law or U.S. law?
I don't know if there would be a conflict there.
There is.
To it.
Assume there is.
If assume there is, we do everything we can to get it to OFAC.
To comply with U.S. law?
Yes.
Now, sharing information across international lines is not just an ancient problem at HSBC. It's still a current problem. And here I want to give you what's happened recently involving this subcommittee. In 2010, in a hearing before this subcommittee, we reviewed an incident in which an HSBC affiliate in the Bahamas was asked to open an account for the Central Bank of Angola. Email exchanges obtained by the subcommittee made it clear at that time that the Angolan Central Bank wanted to use an offshore secrecy jurisdiction, that's the Bahamas, to hold its funds in order to avoid court orders that might lead to a freezing of its funds. At the 2010 subcommittee hearing, I asked HSBC if the account was ever opened, and not surprisingly, HSBC refused to answer, citing jurisdictional constraints. Last week, HSBC informed us that the account had been opened and was opened at the time of our 2010 hearing, but that it was closed 45 days ago. HSBC also revealed that the only reason it could provide that information to the subcommittee was because HSBC had received permission from the Central Bank of Angola. HSBC Bahamas could not release it to HBUS without the client's permission. So that's the problem with what you're telling us today. It's the problem with HSBC's word, that subject to being legally permitted, that description, which is a real big loophole, and it's a problem with other international banks. The international banking system established a financial system that enables them to facilitate financial transactions that move around the globe across jurisdictional lines in a matter of seconds. But when it comes time to sharing critical information with U.S. authorities about clients and their accounts and transactions, then things begin to grind to a halt. And banks point to jurisdictional rules and local laws, sometimes using that argument disingenuously, but putting that aside, that's the reason was given by HSBC not to share that information. Now, in the most recent group-wide policy, your GCL, on April 30th, you say that you will, quote, maximize the sharing of information for risk management purposes amongst group companies and amongst global businesses and functions. You've noted that HSBC is going to maximize the sharing of information to the, quote, the extent permitted by laws. And that, again, is the rub. So my question is, what policies are you going to enact or implement to ensure that you provide law enforcement and governmental officials in this country, which has given HBUS a charter, rather than using jurisdictional constraints as the excuse to avoid sharing information, what are you going to do with your new rules and regs to make sure that this government and the proper authorities are given information upon request?
Sorry. Well, Mr. Chairman, as you indicate, we've committed within the company in the GCL to maximize the sharing of information for risk management purposes among our companies and functions. We have decided that that's the value that we're going to pursue, which is that we need to share information. I think your report highlights the serious consequences that occur when we don't. We've also decided through this policy that when we're going to do everything we can to share information across borders. We have found, as you indicated in your question, that sometimes the secrecy jurisdiction was being used as a comfort in a way. Well, no, we can't share the information because of the jurisdictional rules. It's my job as the Chief Legal Officer to look at that, right, and to try to work that out and make sure that we're not using it as an excuse. But in the end, of course, we have to abide by the law wherever we operate. That's true of any multinational company. Well, all we can commit to do is to, whenever there's any discretion, to exercise it in favor of sharing information. I don't know that we can do more than that, or that any multinational organization can do more than that.
Senator Dr. Coburn.
You may or may not be able to answer this question, Ms. Dorner. In how many locales does HSBC now have operations that have such agreements as the Bahamians? In other words, what percentage of HSBC's locations throughout the world are tax havens or isolated places where jurisdictional differences preclude the sharing of information?
I'm sorry, Senator, I can't actually put a number on that for you.
Yeah, we've seen changes in Liechtenstein, for example, from pressure from this committee and others, where they've actually changed their laws. But could you get that to us from your...
I'm sure that we could. I think it's fair to say that all countries have privacy rules of one sort or another.
I understand, but we're talking about those countries that have privacy rules intended to not be transparent in the commission or the suppression of information that may or may not be, in fact, in the best interest of the global economy as a whole, and may be associated with illicit activity.
I understand. I'm sure we could do that.
Thank you. Do you know of any history in your experience where a bank charter has been pulled for cross-jurisdictional violations of what was perceived as a violation, but what was also perceived as in the best interest of your company as a whole, or in the best interest of transparency in terms of fighting illicit activity?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you. Back to Mr. Levy just for a minute. Do you believe there's sufficient oversight of the affiliates that make up the group compliance right now in your organization?
I think we're on the path to getting there, Senator, but I don't think I can sit here today and tell you that we're at the end of the road. I think we're at the beginning of the journey, and we do have our work cut out for us, but we're on the right path.
As I said, when I believe you have the best of intentions. This is not to question the new management at all, but I think some questions need to be asked. Do you know of any affiliates now that are not complying with the set standards?
Senator, I don't have knowledge of such a thing, but I also can't sit here and tell you I'm comfortable with the scope of...
One further question then along that line. If today you found out an affiliate that was not in compliance, what's the consequences?
The consequences, they'd have to improve immediately. And the new thing, though, is that that information would be shared with all other affiliates, so that Ms. Dorner here in the United States wouldn't be blind to it in the ways that we saw in the examples in the report.
Is there anything with your, you have powerful experience in the government and now applying that in the private sector. Do you have a recommendation for Senator Levin and I in terms of what we could do to make us both more effective, less burdensome, and more efficient, as even though you stated it's in your own best interest to be compliant, the point are there ways that we can help do that in a more efficient way that gets a better result?
I have to say that sounds like a dangerous question. I didn't thought I was going to come here to give you recommendations.
I have a reputation of being a straight shooter. You know, I'm asking that because I really want to know. I actually like to try to fix what's wrong with the government rather than pile on another program that's supposed to do the same thing that's going to fail again. So, you know, if you would like to think about that and shoot me a short note, I'd love to hear from you. But that was not meant in jest or as a trap.
No, I didn't intend that.
It's my intent to try to make government work, and too often it doesn't. And you now, having been on both sides of the wall, can see, you have a perspective that not many people have. Mm-hmm. And I think you could offer us lots of suggestions on how we might be better at what we're doing, much like we've made recommendations in our report.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, Senator. Of course, we have a lot to do to fix ourselves, but I do think that there are ways in which, you know, the sharing of information, which is the key here, right? The sharing of information is the key to these kinds of controls being effective, and there are ways to improve that. There are changes that can be made in the way governments share information with the private sector, and which the private sector shares information amongst itself. That is ultimately what needs to be done. If we're going to really get these illicit actors, we're going to have to have better visibility. But I'd be happy to try to follow up.
Which would mean you need better information from us on illicit conduct. You need a more robust Patriot Act in the areas of this illicit conduct. And you also need access to beneficial ownership information from us.
I agree with all of that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
I want to go back to this question about an affiliate that does not share information with you because of a local law that says that secrecy is the order of the day. These are the secrecy jurisdiction entities, and Ms. Dorner, I guess you're going to give us how many of those jurisdictions there are affiliates in. Is that correct? You were asked to do that. You're going to give us that for the record, I believe. Now, you're committed to do a whole bunch of things. You're going to police the HSBC affiliates that use your accounts. You're going to audit so-called cover payments sent by HSBC affiliates to see if they're circumventing the OFAC filter. Yeah, I think you prepared in your new approach to look at affiliates' internal audit findings, to look for those with weak anti-money laundering controls. And I think you were just asked by Dr. Coburn, well, what are you prepared to do if an affiliate does not provide information to you or to a law enforcement entity in the country that you have a charter, the United States? I guess one of the ways you could enforce it would be to deny a U.S. correspondent account to an affiliate. Do you know whether or not that's ever been done? Has HBUS ever said no to an HSBC affiliate?
The direct answer to your question is no, we haven't, but we have now got KYC at a level for all of our affiliates that we use for third parties. And I can assure you that in the event that one of our affiliates did not pass the KYC as it stands now, I would have no hesitation in not opening an account or indeed closing an account.
And what about if they don't share information with you? That was the question which I believe Dr. Coburn was asking. Isn't one of the remedies you just simply say, we're not going to let you have a correspondent account with us?
The same rules would apply for any third party. If we asked for information and didn't get it, we would close the account.
But you'll apply that test to an affiliate.
We would.
Okay. Talking about secrecy jurisdictions and beneficial owners, I think you and I have talked about this issue before, but let me get you on the record in this setting, Mr. Levy, and that's should the U.S. government get the beneficial ownership information for U.S. corporations?
I believe so, Mr. Chairman, and it would also be helpful to banks it would be helpful to us so that we could better know our customers, because as you know, and probably better than anyone, this is one of the obstacles that we sometimes face.
Okay, that's very helpful, and we'll be sure to be quoting you for that in different places. I want to talk to you both about bearer shares. Bearer share corporations, so-called, are notorious vehicles for money laundering and for other illicit activity because they provide anonymity through assigning legal ownership of the corporation to whoever has the physical possession of its shares. There's no paper trail. There's no way of knowing who owns those corporations, just the way there's no way of knowing who's the real beneficial owner of a bank account unless we require people opening accounts to tell us who the beneficial owners are. But at times over the last decade, HBUS maintained over 2,000 bearer share accounts, despite warnings by internal auditors and outside regulators that the accounts posed high money laundering risks. Internal bank documents show the account owners deliberately pressured the bank to help hide their identities. And Exhibit 95 is one example of that, of a phone conversation between a man named Maurice Cohn and an HBUS banker in Miami. And I made reference to that in my opening statement. I know that HBUS has reduced the total number of bearer share accounts. And I guess my question is, why have any?
Mr. Chairman.
Could I interrupt your answer, and forgive me for this? I want to just read one thing to you before you answer, and that's what the World Bank has had to say about these bearer share accounts in its report last year. It said that no bank with any sort of due diligence standards is willing to conduct business with a company that has free-floating bearer shares. That's what the World Bank said. So now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Entirely understand the concern with bearer shares, a matter of great concern to me. It's always very important for us to know our customer. We've changed our policy here in the US. We've toughened it up. We don't really want to do this business. To the extent we do it at all, it's going to be done under very limited circumstances, only when we can hold the shares ourselves or get them into a custodial agent that we know, so that we can actually understand the movement of the shares. I think that because this is such a matter of general concern, the group we are considering, or the new Group Standards Committee on which I sit with Mr. Levy, they are looking, or we are looking, at the US policy with a view to extending that around the world.
Okay, that's really a step forward. Another issue that I raised in the opening statement was HBUS's willingness to clear suspicious bulk travelers' checks for foreign banks. From 2005 to 2008, on a regular basis, HBUS cleared up to $500,000 or more a day in bulk travelers' checks from the Hokuriku Bank of Japan. They routinely arrived in large stacks of sequentially numbered checks, signed and countersigned with the same signature, which was unreadable. HBUS found that the Japanese bank could not provide any Know Your Client information or explain why 24 of its customers were often depositing large stacks of U.S. dollar travelers' checks, all purchased from the same bank in Russia, allegedly for the used car business people. Now, this was under OCC pressure. HBUS stopped clearing the travelers' checks in 2008, but it kept open the correspondent account despite that Japanese bank's poor anti-money laundering controls. And in less than 4 years, HBUS provided over $290 million in U.S. dollars to a Japanese bank for the benefit of unknown clients dealing with unknown Russians who, again, were allegedly in the used car business. So I guess the real question is, would that happen again? Would that correspondent account be kept open again under your new rules?
Mr. Chairman, first may I say I entirely understand the issue with traveller's checks, and I have asked the AML director immediately to do a full review. As regards Hokuriku, they failed our new KYC standards in 2012, which is why we've closed the account, and I have now exited, or we have now exited, 326 correspondent bank accounts since we instituted the new KYC procedures, and therefore I would hope that we would close any bank such as this because they would fail the new KYC procedures.
Number of money laundering problems identified by the OCC in 2010 related to inadequate monitoring for suspicious activity. HBUS had failed to do any monitoring for suspicious activity for $60 trillion in wire transfer activity.
I've got a call at 3:40, so I'm going to go on and head out now. I guess you'll suspend that until we can...
I will, and are you coming back? So you can pick up if I'm not here.
Among other problems, the failure to monitor for suspicious activity for the $60 trillion in wire transfer activity, failed to monitor the banknotes accounts held by its affiliates, used poor procedures to identify who could get enhanced monitoring, had a backlog of alerts that weren't reviewed, and the OCC provided several pages of criticism related to the weak parameters that the bank used to review wire and account activity. Now, one of the key provisions in that cease and desist order of the OCC in 2010 required HBUS to install a new anti-money laundering monitoring system to replace its old one called CAMP. The new one is called NORCOM, I believe, and the bank is supposed to ensure that it has useful parameters to identify potentially suspicious activity for review. Can you tell us whether or not that effort has been completed and whether you have fully met the requirements of the cease and desist order with respect to a new anti-money laundering monitoring system?
Thank you, Chairman. The whole point about the system, and this is, I know why you're interested in it, the whole point about installing a system is it has to be absolutely fit for purpose. It absolutely has to fit the parameters of the business. It must identify the correct risks, and we must be able to monitor it. We have installed NORCOM. It's been a huge investment. I would be the first to say that with all systems, as usual, improvements can always be made, and it has been pointed out to us that there are two ways that we need to improve this system. We entirely agree. We're on the front foot. We are taking these as a priority, and we will fix it. I would imagine that we will be improving this system going forward forever, because there are always new ways to fix these systems in such a way that they can deter illicit actors.
As I understand the history here, when this was not working properly, by the deadline of 180 days, rather than seeking an extension of the 180 days, the implementation plan was modified and then ended up in non-compliance with the consent order. Is that accurate?
There are two MRAs that have been raised, and they're very technical. They're very important because they're about the validation of the model, and we will have to fix those two things. To the extent that the OCC have raised other issues, we have replied in full, and I believe that you have a copy of that letter.
Is there a new deadline?
There is not, to my knowledge, a deadline as such, but it's closely monitored, and we're in day-to-day contact, literally, with the OCC, who are clearly very interested in getting this fixed.
Okay, we've got a vote on now, and I think what we'll do is we'll release this panel, and we sure hope that you're going to carry out the commitments which have been made by this bank, because our report is a very, very serious, raises just a lot of serious issues about international banking in this particular bank. Again, the bank's been cooperative, but we hope this visibility will actually help reform efforts at the bank. Again, as I've said a couple times this morning, we welcome the commitments, we welcome the apologies. It's the change in culture and actions which are critical. But there's that nagging question of accountability, which others are going to have to judge. We are not in the prosecution business here. We're in the oversight business. Others will have to judge the accountability issues. But it has been significantly missing, not just in this situation, but generally in a whole lot of other banking situations and other situations in modern times. And we hope that somehow or other this the hearing and the investigation will also lead to some greater accountability. But we will now release you, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we're going to stand adjourned for 10 minutes or until Dr. Coburn gets back, whichever comes earlier.
This morning on